Hello everyone! So Resident Evil 9 Requiem was announced a few weeks back, and this game's looking to be really promising. I mean, we're going back to Raccoon City, which is a really cool concept. We have a new character in Grace Ashcroft, who is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft from the Outbreak series, and she's an FBI agent, so I'm very interested in her character. And then on top of all that, it seems that Resident Evil 9 is going to be pushing the horror aspect even more so, similar to what Resident Evil 7 had done. So there's a lot of stuff to look forward to from what we've seen so far with Resident Evil 9. And one of the things I want to talk about in this video is what could we potentially expect to see in terms of the enemy variety for Resident Evil 9. Because Resident Evil 9 has the same director that Resident Evil Revelations 1 had and Resident Evil 7 had, and that is Koshi Nakanishi. And with Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 7, the enemy variety in those games are different. They're significantly different. With Revelations, you had a fairly large amount of enemies to go up against in that game. You had the ooze creatures that you would face throughout the Queen Zenobia. You had wolves, hunters, various different T-Abyss creatures, and then like the boss fights of like the comms officer, Rachel, other just crazy creatures and stuff. And so there was a pretty decent variety of enemies in that game. Whereas with Resident Evil 7, it was a lot more simplistic with its enemy variety, because really all you had in that game were the Bakers, which were like the primary boss enemies that you would go up against within each phase of that game, Evelyn, who was the final boss of the game, and then your standard enemy that you would go up against throughout the entire game were the Molded. And the Molded were okay, but they eventually kind of got repetitive after a while, and they kind of lost their fear factor because it was basically the same mechanic over and over again. Like, it never mixed itself up. And so I'm really curious to see what sort of direction Resident Evil 9 is going to take. Will it do more like what Revelations 1 did, and really what more Resident Evil games tend to do, and that's have a larger list of enemies throughout the game? Or will it be more simplistic like what Resident Evil 7 did? Personally, I kind of hope that Resident Evil 9 has a larger variety of enemies, because to me, that just keeps it fresh, that keeps it more engaging whenever you're playing the game, and there's constantly something new to go up against. Whereas with 7, it just kind of got a little bit boring going up against the Molded continuously. Like, it's the same enemy over and over again. Like, even Resident Evil 1 had a much better variety of enemies, because you had the zombies, you had hunters, zombie dogs, snakes, giant spiders, and then like the various boss fights throughout the game as well. So there was always something there to keep it fresh. And that was one of the weakest parts for me personally when it came to Resident Evil 7, was just the enemy variety was very lackluster compared to what we had seen throughout the rest of the series. And so I'm hoping that Resident Evil 9 doesn't take it in that direction. Personally, I would like to see a larger variety. However, what do you think? Would you like to see a larger variety like what traditional Resident Evil tends to do, and there be more enemies that you can like engage with throughout the story? Or did you like what 7 did, having a more simplistic list of enemies where the more focus is on the boss fights rather than the standard enemies? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments. And so far we haven't really seen a lot in terms of enemies. The only one that we've really seen is this, what people are predicting to be a stalker-like boss, where it has like chains on it, it's walking down the halls and up the ceiling and all this other stuff. That's really the only creature that we've seen in the one trailer that we've received so far. Now, I don't think that's going to be the only enemy. I don't think Resident Evil 9 is going to be like a Alien Isolation type of game. But that is so far all that we have seen. Now, we do know in the trailer that there is like a zombified police officer at one point. Now, whether or not that's like during the Resident Evil 2-3 events and it's just a flashback, or if that's like current era, we don't really know. But that could mean that there will be classic zombies in this game, which would be really cool, because we haven't seen zombies since Resident Evil 6, and that game's over 10 years old now. So it would be really cool if zombies came back, and maybe on top of that we get like hunters and lickers, and maybe even crimson heads can make a comeback. There's a whole lot of potential with what they could do in terms of the enemies for Resident Evil 9, especially considering it takes place in Raccoon City, so maybe some old enemies return, but with new mutations since it's been nearly 30 years since the Raccoon City incident. So there's a whole lot of potential, but let me know your thoughts on this. What sort of variety of enemies would you like to see? Would you like to see a larger variety, or would you like to see the more simplistic style that Resident Evil 7 brought to the table? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video here, and I shall see you all on the next one. See you then.